this idea that, sometimes big change happens by, small actions, and being prepared for when it's your time to put in your shift. And I think that's really helpful, because sometimes when we think about someone like Martin Luther King or Rosa Parks, who was involved in Montgomery, Alabama, we might think about like professional, civil rights activists. But that's not how change is made, right? Change is made by everyday people showing up. I'm Justin Rose, Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences at the University of Redlands. And my book, The Drum Major Instinct, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s Theory of Political Service, really begins with, in some sense, this prop I have here, which is his monument that we have in the National Mall. And on the side here, you can't see it, but there's an inscription etched into it, which says, "I was a drum major for justice." And the thinking there was, we want to capture this idea that King really cared about justice, but the quotation was not a full quotation. And the actual quotation says, "If you want to say I was a drum major, say that I was a drum major for justice, peace, righteousness." And as a result of that, Maya Angelou, who was a consultant on the monument, said, this makes King sound like an arrogant twit, which is a direct quote. But, I thought that there was something there, right? And so the idea of the drum major instinct comes from a story in the Bible with James and John, two of Jesus' disciples, who want to sit next to him in heaven. And so they say, what will it take to do that? And Jesus says to his disciples, if you want to be first, you must learn to serve others. And so King uses that to say that Jesus gave us a new definition of greatness. And if you want to be great, learn to serve others. And for King, all individuals have a drum major instinct inside of them, right? They all want to be first in something, right? Want to be recognized for something. And so for King, he said, okay, channel that properly towards, the things that are really important in society. And in King's case, right, that meant becoming a drum major for justice, drum major for righteousness and peace. I use the example of the Montgomery Bus Boycott, which launched King into, the national stage. This was some individuals in Montgomery, Alabama, who were tired, right, of being forced to ride on the back of the bus. And again, thinking about this concept of human dignity, they wanted to ride on the bus with dignity. And so they launched a boycott, right? And it lasted for 381 days, which when you think of a boycott, when you think of any kind of political action, is a really, really long time. But when you think about it in the history of the civil rights movement, it's really a short amount of time. And, there were certainly some people who were demanding, complete transformation of Montgomery. But really what most people were focused on was, can we just live our life with dignity day in and day out? And so these were everyday citizens who were like, we're going to not ride the bus. And that transformed Montgomery. But right, when you think about the impact that it had on the civil rights movement, it was astronomical. When you think about Birmingham, Alabama, one of the most segregated cities in America at the time, one of the most violent cities in America at the time, so much so that they had a section of Birmingham that they called Dynamite Hill, where blacks lived and had many unsolved bombings. It took great courage, right, to challenge segregation there. And so what happened? Well, kids, right, said, we're gonna skip school and we're gonna participate in protest march. And so much of the video footage that you've seen from Birmingham with water hoses and fire dogs being sicked, it was on kids who said, we're gonna put in our shift. When you think about the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, 250,000 people descended upon Washington, D.C. And this in many ways became the impetus for civil rights legislation. but it was people saying, you know what, I'm going to put in my shift by showing up for this march, and they transformed history. We can't achieve our greatest selves, without others being able to achieve their greater selves. The example I like to draw upon is the King holiday, right? We call it a day on, not a day off, and we want people to go out and serve their communities. And so, okay, that's great. And we think that, we're living up King's legacy by doing that. But I think, part of the misconception there is we think about it as a form of volunteerism, right? So, we're gonna go out and, serve food at a soup kitchen, or we're gonna go clean up a playground. We're living King's legacy, and, to some degree, that's right. King would like for you to do things for others, but King was actually trying to get at something a little bit more radical. And partly what I'm saying is that this conception of King's ideal of service kind of de-radicalizes King, right? It makes us say, let's go help people who are suffering at the hands of structural injustice, instead of what King was really trying to get us at is to think about those structures of injustice. And service really meant working to transform those structures of injustice. So instead of serving food at the soup kitchen, King wants you to think about, why do soup kitchens exist in the first place? And what can we do to transform society such that we don't have people with such great wealth and people who rely on soup kitchens? So that ability to think beyond oneself, to thinking about the needs of others, right? That's a form of transformation. But also, if you think about the context in which he was operating in America, you had a racist society, a society that was wholly consumed with materialism, a society that, when you think about, particularly in his later years, was involved in the Vietnam War. King, thought that you have to think about transforming yourself and thinking about others, but then also you have to move other people from the positions that they're holding, particularly those oppressive positions. But, right, it's not enough for us to say, well, okay, I'm not racist, but I'm within a racist society. We have to, right, transform the structures overall. And so that's why it's about transforming self, transforming others, and then transforming structures of injustice. Believe it or not, probably more controversial aspects of my book was the onus, right? The special onus that King put on Black people. And sometimes, right, particularly when we think about the way in which King is framed, it says only as if he was talking to white people, and, if only you would stop being racist. But King spent most of his time thinking and talking and interacting with Black people, right? And why? And it might seem weird to kind of put an onus on an oppressed people, but there's a long history, dating back to even Frederick Douglass, of realizing that the oppressor gives nothing without demand, right? And so you can't sit around and wait for the oppressor to, give you your freedom, take their foot off your neck, if you will. And so for King, right, there was a special demand on Black people. You have to, right, be the impetus and create that change. And so for, obviously there's a progressive, but, King was very, very hard on moderates, people who said, if only things were just slightly better. And King felt like, no, actually, we have to press for overall structural change, and it starts with the oppressed. In many ways, of course, Jesse Jackson is the outgrowth of that, and quite literally, right, being there at the moment that King is assassinated, in some sense, having that metaphorical mantle, taken up by him. And he carried that forward. And I think, where you see Jesse Jackson, many contributions, but I think one of the important ways that Jesse Jackson carried that legacy forward was King was always very clear that he was never going to pursue, elected office, right? He created a lot of his change from the outside. And I think Jesse Jackson, tried the inside out approach, right? So agitating from the outside, building coalitions, but also running for office and understanding the importance of political office in terms of creating that change. And so, obviously, in terms of his presidential runs, he wasn't successful. But I mean, he moved the needle in many ways, paved the way for someone like Barack Obama, not too long after Jesse Jackson's failed campaigns. Moving away from kind of the great man theory, right? And a lot of what I try to do is talk about, yes, King was a great leader, but everything was about collective action, right? And that's a really important aspect. But nonetheless, right, King had a lot of courage and worked really hard to create change. And I think that if anything, the daunting global issues of the world and domestic issues, right, just I think drive home the message and the point of we can't do it alone. And I think for me, I've spent a lot of time kind of reflecting on, what actions can I take in working with others to create change in the face of challenges that seem so insurmountable. So if anything, I think I probably think smaller now, which seems counter productive or to some of the big challenges. But I think, as I sit with the text, sit with King's legacy and in the face of everything that we have going on, realizing that, you got to kind of take your small steps and you got to create your contributions. And when we think about that as King's legacy, he really was involved in the civil rights movement for really just 13 years. And so when we think about all the change that took place, and we think about the long history of the civil rights movement, he just had like a really small part. And many people just had really, really kind of small parts. And so when you expand out, you realize that you can create change by doing your part in your community, wherever your locus of power is. And I think for me, part of what I wrestle with and thinking about is, okay, what change can I create in my current position, in my community? And how do I sustain that hope in the face of so many challenges? One of the wonderful things about the long legacy of service that we have here, service requirement that we have in the College of Arts and Sciences, is that it's not just about voluntary experiences, right? It's really about being embedded with organizations, getting hands-on experience, and really having an enduring and impactful interaction, right? And so, yeah, we don't count service as, you just going and volunteering a few hours. You really do have to be involved and committed. And I think that's definitely more in line with what, King would want. And certainly we don't, legislate that everything you do has to be, geared towards structural change. But I think it gets us much closer than some of the kind of, I'll say, cheapened ideas of what service could be. One of the things in my book and just King's kind of approach to life overall is the value of human life, right, and the dignity. Because I've kind of been primarily focused on the structural aspect, more and more I've been thinking a lot about just what it means to really uphold the dignity of every human life. And I think that while we might say, yeah, that's a no-brainer, so many of our actions day in and day out kind of belie that commitment. So whether it's, some of what we see going on in America's streets through law enforcement agencies, or even, some of the rhetoric coming from the president, global wars that we see going on, the ones that we kind of focus on, and then the ones that we are completely ignoring, like genocide on the continent of Africa. And so, how can we day in and day out really uphold the human dignity, right? So for me, again, thinking about what are some of the small steps I can take, as simple as it might seem, like how can I create a space where everybody who is involved with the College of Arts and Sciences feels like they belong, like they matter, that they're getting the education they deserve, that faculty and staff feel valued every day they come into work, and that this is a place where they belong. It might seem like a insignificant act, but then you think about, okay, we have an important mission, and I feel very privileged to be a dean of a College of Arts and Sciences that's not just focused on career outcomes, but focused on training up the next generation of democratic citizens. And that's an awesome responsibility. And that's something that I come to work every day dedicated to. But I need to create an environment where everybody feels empowered, and they're bringing their best selves, and they're valuing the humans that they work with day in and day out, such that, right, our students can then get the education they need, and then, right, have those ripple effects. So, when I say I'm thinking smaller, in some sense, thinking about the bigger impacts, but of small actions, and really thinking about what it means to value human life, has kind of refocused me day in and day out.